Okay, so I'd like to start off just by giving you a very quick overview of the Youth Endowment Fund. So our mission at YEF is to fund research on interventions aimed at supporting young people at risk of involvement in crime and violence, with the goal of making the greatest impact possible by finding what works. And we do this through themed grant rounds, each focusing on specific area. And in this grant round, our focus is on psychological therapies. Within these areas, we seek to find approaches that can be thoroughly evaluated, as we believe changes in policies and practices can positively impact young people, families, and the communities that they're in. So with this in mind, we aim to fund good work within these areas and be able to evaluate what we fund in order to be able to work to change policy and practice to line up with what the evidence says is effective. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Hannah? So now that I've given you a quick run through of what we do and our strategy, we can dive into this workshop and what we have on the agenda. So the purpose of today's session is to give you an overview of what the psychological therapy grant round is about, to give you all of the information you need to decide if this funding is for you and to help you submit a strong application. Our focus today is to draw on what we're looking to fund, so thinking about things like the reach, the types of therapies, and the criteria that we're after. Chanel will then talk us through our approach to evaluation, and then we'll go through the application process so you have a clear idea of what to expect. Next slide, please, Hannah. So you might be wondering what intervention we're looking to fund, and with this grant round, the type of intervention we're looking to evaluate are talking therapies, which involve trained therapists addressing psychological and emotional issues. We know that there are a lot of different types of psychological therapies, and in order to have the best chance of providing useful evidence of what works, we're not focusing this grant round on a specific type of psychological therapy. So, for example, we're not after CBT, but rather we're trying to understand what model has the best therapeutic relationship. I'll talk a bit more about this later on and what it means in practice, but for now, I'll hand over to Chanel, who'll go through the evidence surrounding psychological therapies.
Thanks. So as context to this grant round, it's important to consider what we already know from the existing evidence base about psychological therapies and their impact on violence prevention. And that's the focus of this section. So it's worth saying that overall, the evidence for most types of therapies in terms of their impact on youth violence is quite limited. Thanks, Hannah. And so on this slide, you'll see a table that summarizes the existing evidence base for various types of psychological therapy that might be relevant to this grant round. And this information is taken from our YEF toolkit. And if you aren't familiar, this is our online platform that summarizes the best available research evidence about different approaches to youth violence based on real data on what's happened when these approaches have been used before. So you'll see that the top two are cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma-specific therapies. And both of these are included in the YEF toolkit because there's some evidence to underpin them. So for both, from drawing on this evidence, we estimate a high impact on crime and violence. However, for both, the confidence that we have in these estimates is moderate or low, and that's because there's only a very limited number of studies that underpin them. And then moving down, we have speech and language therapy, play therapy, and narrative therapy. And these are not included in our toolkit. And this is because there's no evidence for the impact of these on youth violence related outcomes. However, you'll see in some cases there is evidence for a link on related outcomes, such as externalizing behaviors for play therapies. And the reason that I'm talking you through this is because when designing any YEF grant round, we want to focus on ensuring that we're filling evidence gaps in our understanding of how to address youth violence. And it's clear from this table that these gaps exist in the field. And this brings us on to the question that we're aiming to answer through this grant round, which is, do psychological therapies implemented in an English and Welsh context lead to improved offending outcomes or outcomes related to offending for children and young people, primarily aged 11 to 18, who are at a high risk of being affected by violence, offending, and/or exploitation? So I hope this helps to provide a bit of context into how we've reviewed the evidence base and arrived at this research question. And I'm going to hand back over to Famida.
Thanks, Chanel. So now we'll look at a bit more detail on what we're looking to fund in this round, specifically looking at the eligibility criteria and who you should be working with in order to be able to apply for this round. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I've mentioned before, we know and recognise there are many different types of psychological therapies available for young people and families. And so for this grant round, we aren't looking for a specific type of psychological therapy, and instead we're aiming to build knowledge on various therapeutic models with an emphasis on understanding the therapeutic relationship that underpins them. This includes factors such as whether young people feel heard and understood and the practitioner's ability to consider the young person's background. The projects we fund, they must include psychological therapy as a core component and be delivered or supervised by a clinically qualified practitioner. So for example, whether it's CBT or arts therapy, as long as it's delivered by a qualified therapist, you're welcome to apply for this round. So this visual that we've got up here is to help you understand what we're looking for when we say we're looking for projects with psychological therapy as a core component. So just looking at the top box first, you could be delivering CBT as a standalone intervention, meaning the psychological therapy is the sole activity that leads to the desired outcomes for young people. If we then look down at the second box as a different example, the intervention includes psychological therapy as the core component with additional support for the young person. So, for example, they may be receiving CBT as well as being able to take part in an activity such as Tai Chi as part of the full and holistic offer that you're giving them. So, in terms of the model, we're looking to see if psychological therapy is the core component in the intervention that we'd be funding. When assessing applications, delivery timelines is a key factor we take into consideration. So, we're looking to fund the entire intervention and its evaluation for up to 24 months. This is a general guideline and is subject to change and confirmation during the co-design stage if you're successful beyond the application and interview stages, something which I'll also talk about a bit more later on in this session. And it's also worth noting that for this grant round, we're looking to identify and fund 2 to 3 projects, as we have up to £3.5 million to spend on this round. We expect projects to have at least 20% supplementary funding. So for example, if your project total delivery cost is £100,000, then we'd expect £20,000 to come from other sources, which can include in-kind funding. And so then YEF would be funding £80,000 of that project that you're looking to have evaluated. All of this information can be found in our application guidance, which will be shared with you after this session and also can be found on our website. But for now, I'll hand back over to Chanel, who will talk us through who should be supported through the intervention that you're delivering.
Great. So the focus of this round is on supporting children and young people aged 11 to 18 who are at risk of involvement in crime or violence and may already be involved in the youth justice system. And our aim is to prevent violence from happening or reoccurring so that we can reduce long-term harm. And you'll see these specific criteria for who we're aiming to support on the slide. So these could be young people who are demonstrating challenges with externalizing behaviors such as aggression. They may have been excluded or suspended from school. They may already be involved in the youth justice system, either in custodial or community-based settings. They could be considered at risk of involvement in youth offending due to individual, familial, or geographical reasons. They may be affiliated with groups involved in crime, violence, and trafficking. They may be being affected by serious violence, criminal or sexual exploitation as perpetrators and or as victims. And so that's our broad criteria of who we'd be expecting projects that we fund in this round to reach. And we know that some children and young people are overrepresented in the youth justice system or struggle to access mainstream support services. And we're especially interested in projects that can show that they can successfully and appropriately support these groups. So this includes children and young people from Black, Asian, and other racially minoritized groups, and those who have experience of care, as well as children with special educational needs and disabilities. And we'll talk a bit more about this later and the focus of equality in this round. So in the next couple of slides, I wanted to talk about the outcomes that we're focused on in this round. So when we talk about primary outcomes, we mean the outcome that's used to determine whether or not an intervention is considered effective, and is usually the main reason that an evaluation is being conducted. And there's usually one primary outcome measure for an evaluation of a project. So we're particularly interested in funding psychological therapies where the primary outcome is to reduce children and young people's offending behaviours, including violent or non-violent offending. But we do recognise that it may not always be possible to evaluate this primary outcome. So we're therefore interested in a total of 5 potential primary outcomes. And you can see these on the screen. So we have offending behaviour, looking at violent crime, offending behaviour, looking at non-violent crime, a victim of a crime, behavioral difficulties, which is also called externalizing behaviors. So these are behaviors that are generally categorized as disruptive and aggressive. And then we have drug and alcohol use, which is problematic use of drugs and or alcohol that results in negative and harmful consequences to the self or others. And these are all drawn from our YEF outcomes framework, which you can see a link to at the bottom of the slide. And all of the YEF primary outcomes have been selected because they have the most potential to prevent children and young people from becoming involved in crime and violence. And this is based on evidence which has shown that each of these outcomes has either a direct relationship or a strong association with crime and violence. And most of these YEF primary outcomes are at the individual level, and this is because we see these individual outcomes as the best indicator of positive change to the lives of children and young people and observable in the shorter term. So there is scope in the application process to define a different primary outcome, but we thought that it'd be helpful for you to be aware of what our main priorities are. And so we'll be evaluating each project against one of those primary outcomes. And in addition, we've also identified a range of important secondary outcomes. So when we talk about secondary outcomes, we mean outcomes that provide useful information about the effect an intervention has, and it helps us to understand how that program works. And these are often also the pathway through which primary outcomes are achieved, and programs typically have more than one secondary outcome measure. So the potential secondary outcome measures identified for this therapies grant round are summarised on the slide, and definitions can be found in our outcomes framework. And our application form therefore asks you to identify both the primary outcome and one or more secondary outcomes for your project. And I'm now going to talk you through the YEF approach to evaluation and what it means for you if you apply for the therapies grant round. So as some of you may know, the YEF is a What Works Centre, and that means that we're set up to fund promising work and to find out what the impact of each project is. And this is so that we can understand what works to prevent youth violence and to build a movement that puts that knowledge into practice. And this means that if you're successful in being shortlisted for this round, you'll be paired with an independent evaluator who will work with you to co-design a robust evaluation for your project. Next slide, please. And we have a fairly unique approach at YEF as we see the project and evaluation as two equally important elements that make up an indivisible whole. So we have a promising project, which we hope will prevent young people from becoming involved in violence. And then we have an independent evaluation, which measures how effective the project is at achieving its intended outcome. So we always fund projects in the context of an evaluation being attached to it. And we believe that this is the best approach for generating evidence-based practice. Next slide, please. So some may ask, why do we evaluate? And in essence, we evaluate because we want to find out what works to prevent children and young people from becoming involved in crime and violence. And evaluation helps us to do that. So it helps us to understand not only what works, but also in what context, for who, when, and how. And ultimately, this enables us to provide the best possible care and support and gives us the best chance of achieving our mission. So it's important to evaluate whether programs can achieve their intended impact, and we can't just assume this to be the case. We have a responsibility to ensure that what we fund and deliver is serving young people, and to go a step further to ensure that programs aren't actively harmful, since there have been examples where unknowingly this has been the case. And it's also a key principle for YEF to ensure that evaluations are beneficial to grantees themselves. So having a robust evaluation supports grantees in two ways. Firstly, by supporting an organisation to make improvements to what they're delivering. So really knowing what works and what doesn't work. And also by making the case to others, by communicating the proven benefits, including to children and families in order to sell your offer and increase engagement or to secure further funding. And building the evidence base is an important part of why we evaluate. So there's a big evidence gap in England and Wales, which means we don't know what prevents children and young people from becoming involved in crime and violence, and there's still lots to learn. So in each YEF grant round, we're building more and more evidence and understanding through evaluation, and therefore contributing to addressing that gap. We want to share best practice, scale what works, and make the case for change on a larger scale. And ultimately, this helps other programs and funders and commissioners learn from strong evidence on what works. And that's our rationale for why evaluation is at the heart of everything that we do. Thanks, Hannah. And I'm just going to talk through this diagram, which is from the Early Intervention Foundation, and it shows 10 stages of evaluation. So at the very bottom, we have fundamental activity like developing a theory of change and a logic model. And then as we move up the steps, we come to understanding impact, and then to refining and scaling up the program at the top once we have evidence from the evaluations. And YEF funds different types of evaluations, and we have an overall commitment to fund rigorous impact evaluation wherever possible. So in line with this, in this grant round, we're mainly looking for projects that are ready for a randomized control trial or another type of rigorous impact evaluation. So that refers to steps 6 and 7. And in some instances where projects have less existing evidence for a program, we may consider funding an earlier stage evaluation, such as a pilot trial. And this would aim to test out some of those key features of a trial before deciding whether to progress to a larger scale trial. Thanks, Anna. And we have some principles which underpin all of the evaluations that we run. So you may have heard me mentioning that evaluations need to be robust. So we'd be looking to commission evaluations which involve random assignment. And in a randomized control trial, children and young people are referred into the project. And then they'd be randomized to either receive the program that's being evaluated or to the control group where they'd receive what we call business as usual. And by looking at both groups before and after the program is delivered, we can see the impact that your program has made and directly establish that cause and effect relationship. And this is considered the best evaluation design, generating the most robust evidence, because the randomization element really minimizes the risk of other factors influencing that impact effect, so we can all have more confidence in the findings. And just to mention that those in the control group would always receive business as usual or treatment as usual, including statutory services. So they'd never receive less support than what would otherwise be available to them. And we'll strive to randomise in all cases, but there may be some instances where randomisation may not be deemed possible, in which case a quasi-experimental design or a QED is used. And this is essentially where an intervention and control group are compared, but randomisation isn't used to assign the groupings. And this evaluation design is led by an independent evaluator through the co-design process, where they'll really get to know your project in more detail. And then our next principle is reliable. So YEF requires common measurement of outcomes wherever possible to ensure that our evaluations are comparable so that we can maximize learning across the fund and ensure that all of the measurements that are used in our evaluations are valid and reliable. And for this reason, we have a set of core measures that will be used in almost every evaluation, and more information can be found about this on our website. But essentially, the independent evaluator will be leading on identifying appropriate outcome measurement tools based on the theory of change for your project. And this is discussed in depth during co-design. And our next principle is rigorous. So you may have heard of our YEF data archive, which is central to all of our evaluations. But we've designed a system where pseudonymized data collected from YEF evaluations is held securely over a long-term period. So through the data archive, it's possible to link data from YEF evaluations to other government data sets in the future, such as the Department for Education's National Pupil Database. So we could link information on school exclusions and academic performance, and then also criminal justice information from the police national computer. So essentially, this means that we'll be able to find out the long-term impact of the projects that we fund, and we'll be able to see, for example, whether being a part of a program reduces a child's likelihood of being excluded or becoming involved in criminal activity in the long term. And we've worked really closely with the Office of National Statistics, Department for Education, evaluation partners, and our legal teams to ensure that the process for archiving is really robust and secure. So data can only be accessed by approved researchers for the purpose of benefiting society. And all of our evaluations will archive data with very few exceptions. Thanks, Hannah. And I'm just going to talk a bit about scale of YEF projects and evaluations. So we'll prioritise funding projects that are able to reach and support a large enough number of children and young people to be robustly evaluated. And we've included our estimates for what this looks like on the slide here. And you'll see that there's different requirements for the minimum reach for different types of projects. So for projects that are measuring crime and offending outcomes, we expect that between 700 and 1,980 young people would need to be reached. So 700 is representative of when projects are reaching young people that are involved in the youth justice system, whereas the 1,980 figure is for young people who are not involved in the youth justice system. And then the second one there is for projects measuring all other outcomes. So any outcome that's not related to offending behaviour as the primary outcome. And the expected scale would be between 350 and 800. And again, the reason for that difference is due to whether the young people being reached are in the youth justice system or not. And these are really broad brush estimates in this stage, and each shortlisted project would go through a period of co-design where the specific target number would be refined much more closely with the independent evaluators. But currently, these are the types of expectations that we have for the kind of scale we'd be looking for. And we ask that projects would be able to recruit these minimum numbers of young people in a maximum of 24 months in order to be eligible for this grant round. And then we have a diagram here to represent the fact that the number of children and young people who receive the intervention is half the total number recruited to the evaluation. So that's just something to bear in mind when looking at these numbers. And as I described earlier, that's because we randomise the recruited young people so that we can compare the outcomes between those who have received the intervention and those who receive business as usual in the control group. So the overall number of young people who are recruited is twice the size of those who will directly receive the intervention. And we have more information on our website about this and the randomisation process. I'm also just going to touch on projects in youth custody settings. So we're interested in projects delivered in a range of settings, including the community, clinical settings, and custody settings. We're also interested in non-traditional alternative settings that aim to meet young people where they are. For projects in custody settings, it's worth noting that there may be some unique requirements and different considerations here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that here. So they might have a smaller sample size compared to what we'd typically expect. And this is because the size of the population in youth custody at any one time is just a bit smaller. We'd also have to ensure that appropriate primary outcomes are considered, bearing in mind that offending might not be as relevant since children and young people remain in youth custody for more than 18 months on average. We may be also more likely to do a pilot evaluation because it is a new setting with limited evaluation research. So things might work a bit differently if your project is a youth custody programme. And I'm now going to hand back over to Famida.
Janelle. So as with every round, we do have an eligibility criteria, and all the information around eligibility can be found in the application guidance online. So I'll summarize the key things that will determine if your intervention is eligible for the funding that we haven't already touched on. So one of the things that we're looking for is the organization's track record of delivering the intervention and supporting the young people we're aiming to reach. So we'll fund projects looking to scale, expand, or explore different modes of delivery, as long as it can be demonstrated that the expertise and experience to facilitate this exists within your organization. Another crucial aspect we're considering is your willingness and commitment to participate in an independent evaluation. So at YEF, our mission is to gain deeper insights into effective strategies for preventing children and young people from getting involved in violence. And to help us achieve this, you'll be required to collaborate with an evaluation partner throughout your project. So throughout the application, you'll need to demonstrate and explain your experiences of monitoring and evaluating your project. We do have specific evaluation tools and approaches that must be used if your organization is awarded funding, and you can find more detailed information about this in the evaluation guidance available on our website. So that's a wrap on what we're looking to fund and who the intervention should be delivered to and what evaluation would look like. So before we move on to discuss the application and assessment process, I'd like to take a moment to just pause and give you the opportunity to ask any questions about the topics we've just covered. Hannah, could you please help field a few questions?
Thanks, Famida. Just a couple in the chat already. What is the reason to have 20% delivery cost via other sources?
Sorry, you cut out for me for a second.
Sorry, Famida. Can you hear me okay now? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. The first one in the chat from Kate. What is the reason to have 20% delivery cost via other sources?
Anna, are you okay to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason that supplementary funding is important to YEF is that a few reasons actually. So one of them is that it shows that there is commitment outside of YEF to funding this project, and that there may be an opportunity to have sustainability of the project beyond YEF. So that's the main reason. And the second reason is that if we're able to find projects that we can evaluate that do have supplementary funding, then we're able to use our endowment to find and evaluate more projects across our lifetime.
Thanks, Anna. In terms of the numbers, is the 350 across the 2 years? The minimum number of 350 across the 2 years.
So that 350 figure refers to projects measuring all other primary outcomes which don't look at offending for young people who are already involved in the youth justice system. So that would be 350 as a minimum over 2 years.
Can I ask the question? Hi.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear you.
Okay. I'm Nina. When you talked about having a lead organization, what do you mean by that? Currently, we have been delivering intervention since 2022, and we've been working with some young people, though the projects that we've delivered were mainly for adults. So the two questions for that: do we need? What do you mean by the other lead organization? And second one is really, we have some experience, well, we're currently dealing with that age group as well.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, what do we mean by working with lead organizations, is sometimes organizations might be working in partnership with others to be able to deliver an intervention. So when doing the application, instead of 2 separate applications, it would be one organization would submit an application for the organization that you're partnering up with, and that is the organization that will receive the funding, and then it can be shared with the partners, rather than, again, us processing separate payments for each partnership that you're working with or that is being led by. And the second question, was it you have some experience delivering to children, young people, the people that we're trying to reach. So for that, I think, again, in that application, you just have to be able to build your case and be able to draw to what evidence and experience you have delivering to those young people and your ability to reach the young people that we're asking for you to be able to work with. So being able to demonstrate that in your application.
Yes, sorry, just one subsequent one is that could one have, are you looking for, so we have experienced trained counselors who have their own practice. So can we have like partners as schools and counselors?
Yeah, you can, and yeah, you can, and you just need to make that clear in your application as well.
Thank you.
I think, just in the interest of time, and we've got 25 minutes left, I'm going to close this Q&A session for now, but we'll have a bit more time at the end. So I'd like to just talk a bit about that application and assessment process. So Hannah, if you could just share the screens again, please.
Can everyone see that now? Does that come on?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a lag on my side, but I know what the slide is, so I can get into it. So the assessment process is quite long, and there's essentially 2 stages to this. The first stage of the long listing projects with the potential to be evaluated. What this looks like in practice and actions for you is that you'll need to submit your project proposal by completing the application form available on our website, and the deadline for this is the 24th of May. And once we have all of the proposals in, our team will get to work to assess each one against the criteria outlined in the application guidance. And once we have all the proposals in, and your project is longlisted, you'll then be invited to attend an interview. And this is where we'll delve a bit deeper into your project proposal and give you a chance to clarify any questions our assessors may have. Once the interviews are complete, projects are then presented to our Grants and Evaluation Committee, who will then decide which projects will progress onto stage 2. And in this next stage, you'll be matched with an evaluator and work with them on developing and refining your theory of change and go through what we call co-design workshops. And these are essentially about 3 workshop sessions where you and your evaluator will plan out the delivery and evaluation aspects of your project. And you'll have support from a program manager and evaluation manager, so like myself and Chanel, throughout the entire process. So you'll be fleshing out details like the budget, the timelines and logistics for the project to be evaluated. And the output of these sessions will be a final proposal, which will be submitted and presented by the grant round leads to the Grants and Evaluation Committee for final approval. And if it's then approved at this stage, the grantee and evaluator, you'll be offered your grant agreement, and once signed, both teams can begin setting up and mobilizing ready for delivery. So just looking at these timelines, you should expect to begin delivery around spring next year if you're successful in all of these stages. Next slide, please, Hannah. I'm now going to just talk through a bit more about what exactly we're looking for in the application form itself at a very high level. And we're looking for a project that is well planned and has the potential for a strong evaluation. So the application form itself has 2 sections. The first is looking at answering questions around the eligibility of your organisation and the programme for this funding. The application form is quite long, so we're keen to ensure that you are eligible for this funding before you complete the full application form. If you then get through to these questions and are eligible for this grant round, the next section then has a set of comprehensive questions about the project against 7 assessment criteria, which I'll go through now in the next few slides. So the first one, thanks Hannah, is thinking about having a worthwhile outcome. So do the project outcomes you have match what we're looking for, which is what Chanel spoke about earlier. The next criteria is looking at the organisation's ability to deliver the intervention to achieve the outcome. So we want to see if and how the activities you have planned lead to the outcomes mentioned. We also want to be able to feel confident that you can deliver the activity within our timelines and have enough capacity to do so. On the third criteria, we want to feel confident you can engage and effectively work with the children and young people you aim to serve. And the fourth criteria considers your ability to deliver at the required scale. And as part of the evaluation, you may be required to expand your work and reach. So we need to see and again feel confident you're ready to deliver at a larger scale. The fifth criteria, next slide please, Hannah. Thank you. The fifth criteria is being able to link to existing evidence you have for your project. And this can be both internal and external evidence of evaluation, which you can add in as links or documents to your application form. For criteria 6, we're looking to see if your project can be evaluated specifically in the ways that we do at YEF. So through a randomized control trial or a QED that Chanel spoke about earlier. And then last but not least, a key part of what we're trying to do is see if your project can be effectively expanded and have the potential to influence policy to lead to change. So these are the 7 criteria that we'll be looking for when we're assessing your application. Next slide, please. Thanks. And yeah, so here at YEF, we do have a strong commitment to equality, and we recognise that young people from marginalised background are overrepresented in the youth justice system. And this is particularly the case for young people from Black and Asian backgrounds. So we know if we're going to be making a difference, we really want to make sure the interventions we fund will truly reach, represent and serve the children and young people we say we want to work with. So for this round, we really want to fund an organisation that's led by Black, Asian and other racially minoritized leaders. But we also know there are challenges with this as the space is dominated by white leaders. So to address this, we've recently launched applications for a lead organisation to run a multi-site trial. I won't be going into too much detail about this now. So in short, the purpose of this will be to have one lead organisation which has the capacity to lead the evaluation by bringing together and working with several smaller Black and Asian-led organisations to reach the young people we want to serve. More information can be found about that on our website, or if you email the grants inbox, which we'll share with you at the end of this session. So back to this application process for individual organisations. Another thing we really want to see and feel confident about is your ability to engage with children and young people from marginalised backgrounds, and really thinking through your race equity plans. It can't just be a tick box exercise that you're going through. We want to see how it's being implemented, and it will be and how it will be addressed throughout delivery. So again, this will be assessed quite closely at every stage throughout, like the application, interview, co-design stages that we've got. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we're almost at the end now, so I'll quickly run through how to complete the application form. So we do have an online portal which has all the relevant information I just talked through. I would personally recommend that you write your answers for the longer questions on a separate Word document and save it to avoid any loss of answers if you do come across any technical issues. And you can then copy and paste your answers into the form when you're ready. All of the questions and what each question is specifically looking for can be found in the application website, application guidance, which again is available on our website. That now, I guess, brings us to the end of the webinar. I'm going to stop there now and open the floor to questions again before we move on to summarising next steps and timelines.
I want to go to Dorian first, who's been waiting.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. My question is, when you say you're looking at working with organisations that are Black and Asian led, and to potentially work not just within their own organisation, but unilaterally with other organisations as well, does that have a problem with geographics? For example, we're based in Bedfordshire and we're Black and Asian led. We specialise in talking therapies, etc., in psychology, etc. Would that then prohibit us or disqualify us from working with some either organisations who are based in London or further afield?
No, so that would come in line with you being able to scale up and expand your areas that you're working within. So again, if you could just outline who you'd be looking to work with and the areas that you'd be looking to cover in your application process, that would be helpful. There is a section that says what areas that you already currently work with. And I think you'll be able to state where you'd be looking to expand to.
Okay, because we currently work with Bedfordshire Police and the VERI, the Violence Exploitation Reduction Unit, as well as the Home Office. And we deliver not just training, but we also deliver some of our services outside our given geographic area. So that would be okay then?
That would be okay, yes.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Declan?
Hi, thanks for the presentation, really interesting. A couple of questions or points. So the first one, states on the slides that a statutory body could lead this. Just to confirm, would you be happy to receive an application from a local authority?
Yeah, we would be.
Brill. Second question, with regards to the 20% funding, the YEF outcomes framework is quite similar to that of the Building Resilient Families and Communities. Could it be that the 20% comes from a programme like that, which is linked to another government scheme, or would you be looking for kind of new funding, so to speak?
It doesn't have to be new funding as long as the funding is there available to contribute towards the project you're looking to have evaluated. But I'll hand over to Anna to speak a bit more about that.
You said absolutely right. That's right. It doesn't have to be new funding. It can be funding that the organisation already has secured.
Brill. And then just a final question with regards to Black and Asian leadership. We currently work with a number of providers who could support with that. The leadership team currently within the local authority in youth offending prevention, for example, are predominantly white, but we work with providers who are of Black and Asian minority background. So could it well be that if we can evidence that we'll be partnering with providers that would support that leadership, would that be acceptable for the application?
Anna, are you okay to take that question?
Yeah, I think I've understood. Our focus is trying to make sure that everything we fund and evaluate is racially equitable. So we'd really encourage all projects that make applications to highlight ways in which your project, your organisation, your delivery is attempting to be racially equitable in whichever ways that you do that.
Well, thanks for that.
Thanks. I'm just going to go back to a few in the chat and try and sort of summarise a few together. Asking to clarify what business as usual support is. Is that what the organisation already delivers, or what's available for children and young people via statutory services? And sort of linked to that, how does assigning people to business as usual work?
Yeah, so it's that latter. So business as usual is typically what the children and young people would receive in the absence of your project or in the absence of your organisation. So it's typically statutory services. But we really kind of dig into that in co-design with your independent evaluator to work out exactly what the control group would look like for your project. Sorry, Hannah, can you just remind me of that second part of the question?
Yeah, how does it work with assigning people to business as usual? So if people sort of sign up to the project to receive an intervention, how would they know who's going to receive which, and sort of managing expectation on the clients, really?
Yeah. So the randomization process is led by the evaluators, and really understanding how that works for your specific project will be worked through during co-design. So typically you'll receive a referral, and then baseline data collection will happen, and then the randomization process will happen. So your evaluator and also YEF will kind of support you to think about how exactly that will work for your project.
Now, I'm just skipping through to try and make sure we sort of cover. There's been several questions asked about locality and things, which I think Anna has actually answered in the chat as to whether it has to be kind of local, regional, or national, and Anna's answered that to say any of the above. It's about whether you can meet the minimum numbers, basically, is the important part of that. Is it okay if the project only measures secondary outcomes as identified on our list?
So as part of this evaluation that we'll be looking to commission, we would want one of our YEF primary outcomes to be included in the evaluation, but it will be kind of worked through as part of the theory of change workshops and co-design workshops with your evaluator to find out what primary outcome most suits your project best.
Thanks. And if there's another outcome linked to this, not a non-offending outcome, what's the minimum number of young people they would need to reach?
The non-offending outcomes have been listed on the slide that I shared. So for all outcomes other than offending, it would be between 350 to 800, depending on if the young person is already in the youth justice system.
Have we got time for a couple more now from Ida, or do you want to go back to the presentation?
I think we have time for a couple more, yeah.
Okay, Matthew?
That as well, but we previously had a project funded by YEF and had some issues around potential participants not wanting to be involved in the project because of the data linkage involved in the evaluation, and that was an issue through delivery for us. So I was wondering if there's anything more you can say about that, especially considering the outcomes are linked to offending or future offending possibilities, and also with a control group who wouldn't actually have had any intervention for them to have their data linked. Yeah, if you had any thoughts on that and how that works, if you don't want that to happen, and what the process would be.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very valid concern, and it's something that is definitely a challenge when working with vulnerable populations. And we've had about 5 years of experience commissioning trials now, and through all of our evaluations and projects, it's integral that children and young people kind of are sharing their data, and that's stored in the YEF data archive. But we've developed kind of processes throughout our journey to really work out the best ways for introducing children and young people to the trial and understanding what it means for them and understanding exactly where their data is going and what it means to be part of a trial. So typically the evaluator will kind of lead on this process of ensuring that data sharing information is really clear, the consent and information process is also really clear. So often it's kind of a very collaborative process of onboarding children and young people and just kind of alleviating some of the concerns that they may have around their data being stored long term and just reassuring them that it is pseudonymized and they can't be identified through the process.
Thank you.
Now, there's a couple of questions asking, I can't remember specifically what they were, but can family therapy be part of this sort of group therapy? Because obviously we've said about it being an individual focus in this grant round.
So for this grant round, yeah, we're looking for interventions that are being delivered to the individual, so the child or young person. We've already got other grant rounds that focus on delivering family therapy as a whole. So when we're talking about group therapy, we mean more children and young people being grouped together for therapy rather than it being involving family. But we do recognise the importance of the role that families can play in supporting the child or young person that's taking part in the therapy. So as long as the focus is on the young person and not trying to provide therapy to the parents or the siblings, then we'd be open to receiving applications for that.
Thanks, Mida. I might just put one more in now and then I'll let you go back to the presentation. A couple of questions about queries over the fact that they need to already be delivering the project. Can they be delivering a new project? Things along that line.
Yep. So for this grant round, we're not looking to fund projects that haven't been delivered before, because that would require us to start at the feasibility stage, which essentially means we're looking to see if the intervention can actually be delivered in the first place and if you can reach the young people that we're looking to work with. So if you think back to, and if you look back at the slides that Chanel went over looking at the 10 steps to evaluation, we're looking to ideally start from the efficacy stage, but we are open to looking at projects being evaluated from the pilot stage. So again, seeing it's already been delivered, you have the evidence to be able to say you can deliver it and reach the right people, but seeing can it then be done in an evaluation setting. Chanel, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I think you've covered that perfectly.
Sure, thanks. We have 5 minutes left of this meeting, so I'm just going to stop there now so we can summarize next steps and point you in the direction of resources. So Hannah, if you could just start sharing the slides again, please.
Have shared. Hopefully that's open now. I'm not sure if this is a slight lag your end for me to.
Yeah, that's fine. So if everyone can see the slides, the timelines on display, they can be found on our website and in the application guidance. The important one for this stage is to make note the application deadline is 5 p.m. on Friday, 24th of May. And then I'll hand over to Chanel to point you in the direction of further information about evaluation and just wrap up the session.
Great. So we have loads of resources on our website which cover the overall kind of process and our approach to evaluation, which we really encourage you to look at. And you can find this by clicking on our website and going to funding and then what to expect. And then you'll see a link to a range of resources. Next slide, please, Hannah. And the next one, please. And as I touched on earlier, we also have the YEF evaluation, the YEF toolkit, which we really encourage you to also look at the evidence base. And you can find this on our website and also just by Googling YEF toolkit. And that brings us to a close. We really appreciate you making time to join us today, and we hope that this has been helpful. We really encourage you to look through the application guidance, and if you do have any outstanding questions, please do reach out to us, and you can email us at grants@youthendowmentfund.org.uk. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Hello. Can I ask a question? If you've got 5 minutes, not 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
I came late. So I only just got this invite. I work with inclusions team. So we speak to schools about young people that are at risk of exclusion or need support with their mental health. So they basically go to an alternative provision for whatever reason, whether it's health or mental health or behaviour. From what I've caught, I don't know if this is relevant to me because we haven't done any sort of projects directly with children. We literally just direct children to different places. We have different providers that can provide education for the children that are being directed off of site. Is this service relevant to me? I feel like it wasn't, but I could be wrong. So like I said, I came in a bit late.
Yeah, so I think that would be more appropriate for the providers that you're working with to be able to apply for the funding.
Yeah, so that they can offer and support, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
It's not really for us. It's more, I'll probably, if I get your information, I'll more forward it to some of the providers, isn't it? That's what I'm thinking as well.
yeah, I think that would be the right thing to do for this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.